He's definitely brutal. He's always savage, and you're definitely getting wrecked.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Reflections, and this one is going to be with Jumpy, who is a veteran Swedish Counter-Strike player / coach. So the first place I actually want to start, Jumpy, is this piece of trivia isn't actually a straight fire anymore, because the joke is no one remembers 1.6 anyway, so no one will remember who your brother was as it is. But a detail a lot of people actually did not seem to be aware of, even when you later had your own successful career as a player and a coach, is your older brother was a player called Magix. Actually, funnily enough, it is written similar to the player in Spirit, if people don't know, with only one X instead of two. And not to be confused with Magix and anyone else with any other name, but this was a Swedish player who I would say was like... the best way to describe it was he was at the top of the Swedish scene and then had like a little bit of international play, but he never really got to the level of like the Heatons and the Potties of the world, right? Give me some thoughts on this angle. Obviously, it's something I want to ask you about initially, Jumpy. I asked you about it way back in the day too, but what was it like to have your brother sort of go before you? He was 2 years older, you know, something, right? He's a couple of years older, so he was coming before you and he was kind of trying to experience the pro life. Like, were you, at this time, were you already yourself following CS? Were you watching his career? Were you trying to be as good as him? What was it like back then?
Yeah, like it was actually my brother that introduced me to CS. So way back, this is 99. I'm old now, so I was younger than him, and we didn't have like a really good PC at home. And back then, like internet cafes was really popular. So he was spending a lot of time at internet cafes. So, and he actually, I think back then it was like you were cool if you had an internet cafe sponsor, not like salary. Right. It was like yes. So you could play like from a good computer, good internet and everything. So he started like playing from internet cafes, and I couldn't play as much. I was in a few times, but I think I was around 14 then. So I didn't start like playing serious and following it like fully when I was 16. When I started like, we call it gymnasium, but I think it's like kind of like high school or something. So then I got a laptop from school, so I started grinding on that one. And then the rest follows, I guess.
I mean, the interesting thing, if people actually know what your career was like, you were obviously an in-game leader and you've since become a coach, you've been more flexed the mental side of the game. People don't know your brother was kind of a star player, right? He was like a very skilled player, right? Yeah,
I would say he played with I think Solido, Megaton, and that kind of team. And they were like maybe third, fourth best team, and I think they was also the team that found that. So,
right,
and
could be, yeah.
And I think they also had Vilden in their team, and both were just picked up like Insta from like SK, or I think was it NIP that took set first? I can't recall, but they were like a farming team for the better like teams, you know. So they always like found some talent. Then it was just like a few months, half a year. Then they just moved on to SK or NIP. So he was kind of like in the farming team in Sweden.
One thing I want to ask you about, actually, Jumpy, is for people who don't come from Sweden, I feel like a thing that's really been misunderstood in the history of esports is when Sweden used to be like the #1 country in Counter-Strike and have all, like the joke was you could actually have like a world championship / major in CS where like 2 of the top 3 teams would just be Swedish. It would be like 2 Swedish teams played each other in the final, right? When people used to hear back in the day, like they're the best at CS, a bit like you think of modern esports games like Koreans are the best at StarCraft or whatever, people often famously said like, oh, it's because in Sweden it's like accepted to play games, and it is, which is like, I've always thought what a weird angle that is, because like the internet angle's a great one. Obviously the internet was fabulous and everyone at university had it. It was very cheap, there's these internet cafes. That angle's a good one. But I've always found that other one really weird, Jumpy, because actually isn't it basically the opposite? Like back in the day, if we're talking about like the 2000s here, if you're trying to be a pro, the joke is even if you are heated and you win like every tournament, like you actually make fuck all money compared to any normal Swedish person. Like I think back in the day, if you were like the #1 player in the 2000s and you won like every tournament and had like the best salary, the joke is you might actually make like 25,000 euros in a year. You know what I mean? Like it really wasn't like, I actually feel like people have got it backwards, haven't they? It wasn't actually kind of back then. You were kind of nerdy if you did this shit in Sweden, right? I'm sure it wasn't like super cool public. Like maybe with the nerds in the internet cafe, it's cool. Can you give me a sense? What was it like when you were coming up? What was esports to you?
I think like it was kind of like 50-50. I don't think like it's something with CS that like it wasn't like any other games, because like all the guys in school, like even if they didn't play a lot, you were respected if you were good at CS.
Right.
And I think that kind of been like throughout Sweden, that it was like if you were good at CS, it was like, okay, you're good at like in not maybe like football, but it was like some kind of status to be good at it.
Right.
Even though like people weren't like grinding it fully. Like everyone knew what CS was. Even the girls knew it, but the girls thought you were nerdy if you were like, oh, US gaming.
Sure.
So I think that's one aspect, that it was kind of like a status symbol to be good at the game. And it was just CS like for in Sweden. Like no other game like you got any respect from like being good at. Like if I would say like I'm a super good at StarCraft, no one in Sweden would care.
Sure,
But
sure.
like, CS was just special in a way, I think.
Did
And,
it make
we
it?
also-
Oh yeah, go on.
Yeah, we also had like we have like winter time so long, and we also had good internet. I think that's a small factor as well.
Right.
That you stay in a lot, and to have something that you can dive into, like when it's bad weather outside, it's also a factor, I think.
Even though I'm sure, like I know in some of your early teams, you did actually play a little bit with your brother. I'm sure on one hand there's a positive to that, like they can obviously introduce you to people, but it doesn't it to some degree also, can it be a negative? Can it like, wouldn't people sort of write you off like, oh, it's just his brother, or he's not as good as him? Did you ever have that, do you think?
No, I never, like people knew who my brother was, but I never like played with him like casual, or we never mixed together. Yeah, he was doing his thing, and I didn't want to ride off like his success.
Right.
So I kind of like little brother, you know, I want to make it on my own.
Sure.
So, and it was kind of funny that like in the end of his career, like when he like started to think about quitting, and my career was starting to go up, like we met in the middle. So we had like 6 months maybe where we played together. So it was nice to have that time.
By the way, why did he not continue as a player? Just lost interest or something like that? It seemed like he still could have made it. He was only like like I said, a step below, right?
Yeah, I think it was like, yes, the lifestyle itself, because like, as you said, like he was not at the best team, so he didn't like have a great paycheck, and just trying to survive daily, just to play in the game, I think took its toll. And I think also he was in the first lineup of FNATIC, like the first ever CS lineup, and I think there were talks that he would be like staying with the ESN and they would
Right.
rebuild, you know. At least what my brother told me. I'm not sure like how accurate everything is, but I think that was like a big blow for him, that kind of lost motivation, you know, start over. And I think a lot of his like former teammates stopped paying. So you're like starting from fresh, then you need to have that extra motivation, which I don't think he had.
One thing I think people probably don't know about your career, Jumpy, is I think they only know you 1.6 when you were on the MYM team with Zet, etc., when you had those big results. So I don't think they know. Like, one thing I used to love about 1.6 back in the day is because in Sweden you had this amazing LAN culture of like Rendezvous and Birdie and all those smaller LANs, and then you had like the internet cafes where people could go and people played 10 mans. And essentially what I'm getting at is like, if there was any talent in Sweden, it all got uncovered basically. Like, you just see it. Then it had such an amazing hierarchy. And so one thing I remember back in the days, I used to always religiously follow all those smaller lands and even the small Dreamhacks, because that's where you'd see the next talent. And what people might not know is you were in the mix with those guys who were the team famously called Blank, where those basically became the next top players. People like Gox and Face and Threat and Snajdan and all these people. So like old school people, newer school people. Let me ask you about some of these people. Like I saw, even though it must be at the end of his career, that you played with Snajdan, who's like quite an interesting figure himself, because as far as I know, he's someone where like people, even though he was mainly actually known again for like frag movies and stuff, what people maybe don't know about him is people always say he was like a very smart player, could like read the game or something. I don't know how long you played with him, but can you give some thoughts on this player? He must have been a legend at the time you played with him, right?
Yeah, like he was like at the end of his career, and he was a bit special, like socially. So,
right.
But I think I can start a little bit before, because I think before Blank, my best like my first like team that made any results was Volt Gaming. I played with Threat, Paradox, Sono, and Duel or however you want to call it. And me and Threat were like geeking out in the game, and we were like very structured and detail oriented with every like how we wanted to play CS. Like try to find every tick. It should be structured, detail oriented.
So you kind of like both the IGL of the team, basically, sort of.
I was IGL, but we were both like really liking the tactical aspect. So I think I was more back then, at least, a natural leader figure, and but we both like loved the tactical aspect of CS, and I think we both like were dreaming up tactics. We jumped on the server. Oh, I thought about this. And I think that was good, just like get a better view of CS. But I don't feel like that calling style didn't take me like further. You know, it wasn't until like I got into Blank, and it was actually Gux that wanted me in. So, and when I got there, like Snajdan was the IGL, so I just had to learn. And what I learned from him was like unpredictable, like reading team, like just sometimes just using the manpower to take fights and just like flow in the game a little bit more. So I feel like after my experience with Snajdan, I learned to kind of balance the structured and also just free calling, reading the game, and not everything being like so structured and detail oriented, but also like rely on just reading the game.
By the way, being as this is obviously right before Gox got to be in that amazing FNATIC that was like winning everything and they were blowing everyone out the server. He looked at one of the best players in the world. Who was he at this point in time? Was he already, could you already see he was like a talent, a prospect?
Yeah, everyone in like the CSC knew that Gux was like a beast. I think he even had like a few. I played with him in Volt Gaming as well, like with my brother Jewel, and I think we had Bloomstar as well. So it's pretty decent lineup, but it only lasted for a few months, and then he moved to Blank, and then when they got a spot open, I think it was before instead of striker, Gux vouched for me to get me in. And like everyone knew he was a beast. It was just like, I think it was the game against SK at Dreamhack. I think he just like dropped 26 on T-side train, just entering B-bomb site, like won the match completely on his own. And I think that's where like FNATIC saw like, okay, who is this guy? And then grabbed him short after, which also meant that we didn't have like any lineup for, I think it was IEM Hanover.
Right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, he was a beast.
By the way, if you were someone who yourself was playing the in-game leader, then I imagine you must have been in a similar position to people like Threat later on, etc., where the problem in that spot is usually they don't recruit in-game leaders, they recruit the star players. So if you're the in-game leader, you have to sort of, every time you get a Gox type player, you have to like use him the best you can, but then it's like if you have too much success, he's just going to sign for SK or FNATIC or whoever it might be at the time, and you have to find the next guy, right? What was that part like? Could you handle that mentally, like knowing you have to reset over and over again? Isn't it a bit of a bother?
Yeah, I think like for me it was a little bit different. Like I knew back in my head that like an ideal is not going to be picked up. It's going to be players that I need to create my own team or be part of a team and build it up to get anywhere. But I was so lucky because once I started performing, it all happened kind of fast in like 2 years span, and then we got the Meet Your Makers lineup like out of nowhere, and we didn't like just go from like, oh, we started to play good. It just like from nowhere, we just started performing on an international level. So we didn't have that issue. Like when the team started performing and we're beating team and playing close against FNATIC, then it's like people aren't as like excited to leave, you know. And we also had like a decent organization, not SK, not FNATIC, but Meet Your Makers they had some backings from some bank people and stuff like that.
Was it the case that, like, when you're in teams like this, do you actually try to, like you say, trying to make your own team? Will you try to actually have, like, a very strong imprint on the players? Do you like to let players in this era, do you, like, play around how they want to play? What kind of an in-game leader were you?
I think most of it was me calling, but I also, like, called to set up my players and give them, because I had, like, MODDII, Delpan, I think pyth was, like, come from nowhere, like, had 1.5 years experience, but was really good. And later on we got Set. There was also like, he was not the old Set, but he was still good, and he was really good at communicating and team playing and stuff like that. So it was just about like, how can I call to like either get them in a good position to get kills or get map control so we can play on the rotations. So it was not like, okay, the players need to play for our system so we get the site. It was more like, how can I set up my players? But I was directing a lot of it.
Right. Was it the case that when you, because another thing people don't remember, they just remember the biggest moments, if you notice, is people really think that like that Zet just joined this team when he got kicked out of SK and then suddenly this team was good. But it's like, again, you missed the story, because if you followed Swedish CS before, in fact, the joke is the reason why Zet joined this team is because they were already good. Like you'd already beaten SK and had games against the FNATIC team and all these, like in those Swedish lands, I remember this team was already on the rise before you had Zet, when you had the Hib player, who was another well-known like player at that level of CS. So if people don't know, look, obviously we're going to get to the Zet thing in a minute. It was great for like the value of the name and the tournament results. But even if Zet had never joined, this team was on the rise anyway, right? You were going somewhere as a squad.
Yeah, I think we started out like, I think Peter wrote to me and he said like, do you want to play like Dreamhack Stockholm? It was not like we're creating a team. It was more of a mix for like a BIOC tournament at Dreamhack Stockholm, and the top 2 of that LAN would get to play the WCG qualifiers, I think. And yeah, we ended up winning DreamHack Stockholm, and then like the day after we played WCG qualifiers, and I think we had like one easy match at the start with the qualifier, and then we played FNATIC the second game, and I think we lost like a close 2-1.
I mean, this is when FNATIC's like the #1 team in the world, though, to be fair, like, right?
Yeah. they had Getra, that Gook, Karn, f0rest, like DSN, like this is a stack team. If ever in a 1.6 it was a stack team, like by name value, that's it. And we were like, oh shit, we're actually pretty good. Like, should we like be serious about this team? And I think actually like MeetYourMakers like contacted us like right after like the match against FNATIC. And I think I said that we should wait until after the Inferno Online League finals, just to see like maybe get a better number on the salary, just to see like if it's not a fluke, just to be sure about the team. Because he was like, we have not practiced, we just played this BOC tournament and then the qualifiers, so we didn't know anything about the team. To just jump in and signing contracts would be like a little bit rushed, I think. But yeah, then I think we went to like just maybe a month or two later. We played the Inferno Online League finals. We played SK the first game, and that's where we beat SK. I think it was 2-0. And then we met Clan. I think was in the final. It was Threat, Crystal. I don't know. No, Getra was in FNATIC then, I believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's where after that we signed for MeetYourMakers.
What about this then? So one thing I want to ask about is another thing about this team I found very interesting was these weren't all the top names and players. In fact, actually, some of the reasons we're going to get to now were sort of the reasons that kept these guys out at the top end of the scene. Like the craziest one ever, I have to say. And I'll tell you this, Jumpy. I do hope at some point I'm just going to do an interview with him and he can just tell me what he thinks. But like, I can tell you that our old mate Delpan is not happy with me, mate, because apparently when CSGO first began, I went back and checked this. I did do one of those videos where it's like, who is so-and-so? Because he'd just come back in CSGO playing with like those guys like pyth and stuff in that SK team. I did a video like who is Delpan, and in it I mentioned, because lots of stuff I remember from the scene, you know. You'll know what I'm talking about when I say this, but he didn't appreciate that I mentioned this. The problem is that at the time that he came up, I remember there being like POV demos on like Fragbite or whatever, and when he came along, everyone watched it and they were like, well, he's too good, isn't he? Obviously just cheats. Like, this player's just a cheat. And in fact, and the problem was at the time, that was the reputation people said. They said, like, he'd hacked or he'd use a wall hack or something. And I will say, the reason why it's tricky is this, Jumpy, is I did then see him, like, a month in this story later, do this at, like, IEM Dubai and do, like, all no-scopes on, like, the best players. So, obviously, it turns out he was just insanely good. But if people don't know, this kind of was, like, one of the reasons why this player wasn't at the top, right? Like, if you want to watch these demos, the skills are insane. But the people, they just thought he was suspect or something, or he had a bad reputation or something. Can you give me your thoughts? What was it like in this era?
Yeah, I actually have a fun fact, because I played with Delpan on LAN, like a small LAN, like was like 200 people, not a big like CS tournament. It was like no one there. And I think one of my friends like was in contact with his friend. I didn't know Delpan, and then it was like, okay, 2 guys from Gothenburg is gonna join us on this LAN. So it was me and 2 like friends from where I lived, and then Delpan and his friend MK. And they went up and we played like a small LAN, and he was doing like the same shit, like hacking, like weird hacks, just have a good feeling about where people were. And it looks weird. I am not gonna tell you.
Sure, yeah.
It looks fucking suspicious as fuck. But so when I had this experience before, like the internet blew up about like a Delpan cheating, he even got banned just by the eye test.
Yeah, it's some like online cop or something, right?
Yeah. Like back in the days, you didn't like get banned by anti-cheat. It wasn't there yet.
Yes.
Like all the anti-cheats was shit. So all people did to get people banned were like doing like movies about people cheating. And sometimes they get banned, sometimes they didn't. But it was really hard to catch cheater back then. But it was also like a much more like if you were just good online, no one cared. Like the status was to prove yourself on LAN, and that's kind of like filtered out a lot of cheaters, I think. Because if you don't get status from it, then why are you doing it? Because you're not getting money from it. Back then, at least. So yeah, I kind of lost my thoughts.
No, it's all good. I'll tell you what, I'll spin it in another question, because the reason why I brought it up is I actually think this is the main reason this player wasn't already at the top of CS, because I actually think if you look at his skill set, mate, I know people judge great players based on like resume, you know, how many cups did you win? If you ignore that, if you just watch what the guy could do in the server, no joke, this player is actually a contender for like best sniper ever in CS. I'm not even exaggerating, right? You was in-game leader. Give me some thoughts. Like, I thought, yeah, especially when he came to SK later, I thought he was unbelievably good, mate. Like, I've stood behind him at lands and just watched him hit all these shots. He's ridiculous.
Yeah. Like I was lucky to have two of the like mostly the same player. I think in 1.6. I think MODDII, he was like in 1.6 he was a beast. Like he was so good, and the Delpan was also like, it was just like really good. Like he was not just an operator who was hitting shots. He was also like really good game sense, like doing the crazy hacks. He like had a feeling where people were like. And when you like have that instinct of the game, you're gonna position yourself good. You're gonna be in action, and you're gonna have a lot of impact. And I think Delpan had that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about, obviously, the other player, if people don't know who was the other star, was MODDII in this team, who obviously played much longer. He played in the CSGO as well. Right? If people don't know about this player, it's another player where it's just actually obvious, like, one, he's mega talented. You watch his game, his fucking aim's mental. But then also, he's someone else who, I mean, in his case, look, I know this term means nothing now because everyone says it all the time in online games, but people used to say he was toxic, which just meant back then, if you're Swedish, by the way, that just means you whine. It just means you whine too much is the problem. I know these terms mean, it just means people get annoyed that you get fucking rage in the game, or, you know, you didn't do good. Like, give me some, like, this has to be what held this guy back, right? I mean, the joke is eventually got kicked out of the team again, but, like, it's not talent. Like, again, this is a fabulously talented player, right?
Yeah. I think like even like I think it was like around 2009, 2010. I would like put him out there, like maybe even shoot a shot stronger than f0rest that year. I'm not kidding. Like he was so good, and it was also like an aggressive lurker, but he was not like always aggressive. So I could just leave him alone in his part of the map, and I would control the core part of the map, and he was just finding timing. So I remember like playing Dust 2, and we were just putting pressure mid and short, and from nowhere, like MODDII got 2 entries on B. I was like, okay, easy call, like rotate B, you know? So it made life easy sometimes, just like call around it. But you can also, like, I could trust him. I didn't like, have to direct him. Like, just to have one guy that can work the part of the map himself and not just go and die, sometimes surviving, sometimes getting entries was like really good. And he was shooting super hard. I think his problem was like Sweden, like in CS back then, it's not like it was now. Like we were a bit tougher. It was a little bit harder. Like it wasn't like people could take wine, but I think MODDII sometimes like he had this winning mentality that he really wanted to win, and he got these emotions, you know. And sometimes he like, if we really like suck, he didn't know really where to put that energy, you know. So like it could be like not only whining, it could be like raging sometimes. You
don't interpret it just as negative, though. To you, there was like a good intention behind it, even if it came off negatively. Right, I see. Right.
And for me, it was like a problematic in a way, because I think I'm going to jump ahead, like we can go backwards a bit after. But I think after the China tournament, where we like just went out in the groups, we played super weak. And I think that's where like some players in the team wanted to like remove MODDII because it was like a bit toxic. And I was like holding back a little bit because I knew like we're not going to get another play like MODDII.
Sure.
And we didn't have any management. So it's kind of like just me, like, okay, if we start to get a rift in the team, then stuff happened. Like I was like, okay, no, we're not gonna kick MODDII. But then stuff happened outside of the server that I'm not gonna go into. But that was kind of like, okay, I stood up for this guy, and then he do this, so I couldn't protect him anymore, and we decided to swap him out for f0rest.
Fair enough. Here's the question I have for you, which is, when this first big event, which is the one that actually people probably remember this team from, the breakout, was obviously IEM Dubai, where you guys came runners up to FNATIC, right? The context of this one is crazy as well, Jumpy, because even though, as I say, you talked about previously, you had all the success in the summer where there was all these Swedish lands where you went and your team either was like the best or one of the best teams, even before you got Zet into the lineup, and was looking awesome. So as a result, right, that shows that like, there's some potential there. But most people, like the analogy would be in modern CS now, if someone's good like on one level but they never played the major, you just assume they're going to fail. You think, oh, come on, like the lights will get to them, or, you know, like other teams are all pros, or even just travel. I mean, fucking hell, Dubai's not like Sweden, man. It's on the other side of the world. It's a pretty crazy place to go for a first big event. But the craziest thing is, this event's like some out of a fucking movie or something, mate, because not only did you guys come runner-up at the end and beat like the fucking Golden Five and all those players, but people forget this detail, Jumpy. On day one, you just like 5-0'd the group. that had FNATIC in, and like after even the group stage, people were like, who the fuck are these guys? Like, are they actually like just a top team now? And I can tell you, I knew all the other pros at the time. I obviously was working with SK. They were all just in denial, mate. They all just thought, like, they're just like lucky or whatever. They're not going to be that good. Like, you had to actually beat these teams before they sort of gave you the stats. Give me some thoughts on this event. This event's wild, mate. It sounds like some out of a fucking movie, like I say.
Yeah, I'm gonna add you another twist from this, because as I mentioned, like we played Dreamhack, and then we had the Inferno Online finals, and we practiced a little bit before Inferno Online League finals. But after that, I went, I think, to LA for like a 6 weeks vacation.
Okay.
And during this vacation, it's like the team writes me, "Oh, can you go to Dubai the Monday after you go home?" So I come home on Friday, and they want to leave to Dubai on Monday to play the tournament. And I was like, okay, I'm emailing my boss. Can I get an extra week free from work? And as soon as he approved it, then I was like, okay, let's do it. So I got home on Friday, and then we practiced like the whole weekend, and then we traveled.
You only practiced for one weekend, though. You were just, aside from that, you were off the PT completely. Fucking
I hadn't been playing CS for 6 weeks. And we were like, before this tournament, like I think we had like tops like 4 weeks of practice as a team.
Right. So it must have been a surprise to you then.
Yeah, I knew that I had good players, that we were playing good. Like we had some tournaments behind us, so we had confidence going into it. And then, like when we started off, like I don't know if we had FNATIC the first game. I think it was. I'm not sure, but I think like
yes,
we had
the opening game. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we beat the FNATIC with 69, if I can recall it correctly. And then like, okay, they beat us in the qualifier, and then we came back and we beat them pretty comfortably, like 69. And that's where like, yes, the confidence like bloomed after that tournament, beating FNATIC first opening game, like comfortably. And I think 4 out of 5 games, like no one got double digits. I think it was only the last game was like 16-14. So going into playoffs, we felt really, really comfortable. And that's where we played, the Golden 5, Vitriolic, Taz, Neo, Cuban.
I've got an obvious question about this, which is that team, just like the one that they had in CSGO, even though it was slightly different players with snacks and stuff, right? I always thought the quality about that team that made them so epic was they were really hard to beat. Like, it's not like they won every time, but they're the team where, like, it's always like, 16-14 or overtime. So you guys destroyed them in this tournament. That itself's kind of crazy, right? Like, they're not Swedish. It's not like you played these guys a million times. Like, that's actually a scary opponent to face on LAN.
Yeah, and I think also, like, They had some issues with us, like they played in MYM before. I heard at least that they changed like owners and stuff. I'm not sure how true it is, but they took like the problem they had with the organization. They took it out on us. And remember, this is our first like tournament, and like I think Taz mentioned it in June, but that was respectful at least. Like like they had a beef with the organization, but on the server before we started the game, like they just like be careful, you suck, and just like trash talk us.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so that like just fired us up even more, And then like I think that backfired against them because they were so cocky and tried to trash us, And then when we had like the great start on Inferno, I think we were up like 8-0. They calling a timeout, and we were just staring them down. And we had pyth and zet, they're just like trash talking back during the game. So all that energy they had before the game, that just reversed on themselves. And I think like they had a hard time that game. I think what happened? I lost myself again.
It's all good. I think the only other thing I want to ask was, since in the final you guys had to play the FNATIC team, which by the way, like that team is a contender for like best team ever to play Counter-Strike. It's like unbelievable. As you said, it was so stacked. Like the joke is, if like DSN's like one of your worst players, you've got a pretty fucking insane team like that. So he's usually one of the best players in the world, right? I don't blame you for losing to this team. Like this team could beat everyone, right? Like when they're on, they're just on, right?
Yeah. And like I think what the matchup for us was good. Like I thought of myself like as a good caller, and we also had good pieces. But we didn't have the experience that FNATIC has. But I think the skill was there. Like I think we could, in hindsight, like if you look at the players we had pyth that like he had a good career after Media Makers. We had MODDII, we had Delpan, zet, the legendary player that was still like not the zet he was, but he was still a great player, So if you just go by like how the careers panned out after Media Makers, you could see that we had a good team. So, but we didn't have the experience. So I think in finals, we had a tough time beating them. And also, I think KRiMZ did a great job. Like, they lost against us first time, and then I think in the final they had a better game plan. And I mean, like, we barely had like even practice.
Sure.
We were not like I was not scouting opponents. Like, we were just going on the fly. Most of the calls I did was on the fly, trying to read the game. So I think we did good considering.
On the topic of Zet, as I said, the team was actually already good even before you joined. I mean, basically, it was the timing was there that SK was kicking him out. So, like, obviously, you're going to try and get a player like that if they're available. I have to say, because I just recently did this article where I went back and I rewatched a bunch of, like, old demos that are on YouTube and watched all the old fragments. Dude, the thing that I'd forgotten about was this. I totally agree with you. If people know how good Zet was back in the NIP days, etc., obviously, he wasn't that player on MYM now. Like, no one was saying, like, he's just the best player in the world. And in fact, as I pointed out, actually, you could argue he wasn't even the best player on the team. You had Delpan and MODDII who were like complete studs. But I have to say, when I went back and watched, it's not that he was like totally worse, and it's not that he was as good. It's more like it looked for real, like it just came in flashes. Like, I watched some of the games, mate, and there actually are some games he has where it looks like holy fuck, like on train and stuff, he's fucking insane. And like some CT sides, he just shuts everything down. But then there would just also be those games that he never would have had before, where he just wasn't that best player in the server. What's it like to work with a player like that? Because on the one hand, you want to believe they're the player they were, but like you say, he couldn't do it all the time, right?
Yeah, and also we need to like also know like what we compare him to. Like Seth back in days, I would like when Seth was breaking out. In my opinion, I would rate him even higher than f0rest. I think f0rest had a much longer. He had
Sure,
more longevity. But also like that first year or first 2 years of Seth, like it was like you couldn't understand what he's doing. Like he was just like doing his like going out like inside shot and he was also like smart, and he's really like a guy that's just brings up the team mood. Like his mouth goes like in rapid speed. Like he talks, he shoots headshots, he does everything, you know. So like an IGL dreams to have a player like that. Brings up the mood, gives you all the information, also shoots heads. Even though like he didn't shoot as many heads that he did like in his peak, he was still like a top player in my opinion. And I don't understand why SK kicked him. I don't know how long they had him because he was in CS Source for a while, and maybe they struggled and they felt like, okay, it's not the old Seth, and they compared him to what he used to be. But we found him very, very good in like our team.
By the way, as you said, another thing about your team that was an interesting dynamic is already it would have had some drama anyway from having people like Delpan and MODDII who have this reputation. But I actually think the players, you referenced them earlier, it's actually Zet and Peter who were sort of like the mouth of the team, as it were, because if people don't know, Zet, as you say, was just someone who permanently trash-talked anyway. That's kind of his game. But if people don't know Peter, even though now actually he's way more chill guy, and he's more of like an authority figure himself, like, he's mad spicy. Like, I remember back in the day, he was the one who, like, when he was on FNATIC, he was like straight up calling out Na'Vi for cheating and stuff. Like, this guy never held his opinion back at all. So your team also was a little bit spicy, right? Like I said earlier, it wasn't just that like you were on the rise that these other top teams tried to dismiss you. I think they also didn't like the fact that your team had an attitude. You know, you're supposed to just come in and bow to them that they're the kings, right?
Yeah. And I think also like part of it was Seth bringing that out of the team. Because I think Seth was probably the biggest trash talker. You can even I remember like when they played the WCG final against the Golden Five, and you can see like Seth just like he's almost at their table, you know, he's screaming in their face, trying to, you know, leaning from his chair, like So I think that energy, like I think Pita really went along with that energy. I think MODDII did it as well, and I was went along with it a little bit, but I was a little bit more calmer. And Delpan is also like more of a calmer, quieter guy, you know. But like we had it was a very special team because we had Seth that is really like happy, outgoing, and then we had Delpan is more quiet, but he's also like he doesn't like when things go wrong, and he can like put out like small comment here and there. And you had MODDII that was also like when things were going to shit, he was also like telling his opinion. And the Pita was like he was like neutral, I would say. He just went with the flow of the team, and I was the guy that was trying to direct these guys. And I remember like I was really hard when it came to like listening, behavior stuff. I was not that hard like, oh, why are you doing this play? But it was more like if you're not listening to tactics or not talking or communicating, then like I would rage as fuck. I could go from the calm guy to like smashing keyboard. And it was actually like a meme that like people knew, like when I got mad and then I smashed my keyboard and I couldn't talk because I used the key buttons back then. It was like, okay, Jimmy smashed his keyboard. Just take a pause.
Right. Okay.
But it was fun times. It was fun times.
So it sounds like the thing that's interesting about your team, though, is it sort of worked, like the mixture of personalities together. Like if you had one of these players on the other, it might cause an issue, but somehow like it fit together.
It fit together at it. Like as long as everything went good, like I think everything like that energy just melted together perfect. But I think it was like when we started to like lose a bit of our performance, then it went like we went as fast as we came, kind of like the team just as soon as we lost MODDII, or we not lost MODDII, like we removed MODDII and we got f0rest, like the team wasn't the same. Like we were like a decent team, nothing great, nothing good, like playing decent groups, but we didn't go playoffs or anything. Like, and the team kind of died after that. I think I made a decision to leave the team after 2 tournaments with f0rest, if I'm not mistaken. I know that Peter said that they kicked me, but I don't know. Like maybe they talked about it behind my back, but I made a decision to leave because I was working full time and also traveling around, like, and then rebuilding a team that I didn't feel the team the same way. It was just like, okay, this is enough. And the CS was also dying. Like this was 2010, so I was like, what am I fighting for? Like, how long will this live? I didn't know that CSGO came, but
of course. After this Dubai run, though, the cool thing was, even though a lot of pros, I mean, it's not that they're haters, it's just usually if someone does have one result, they are a fluke, you know, it's not that good. Like, obviously, the result that confirmed this was legit was when you guys won Dreamhack Winter, because if people forget, that tournament had all the top teams in it. It was a very stacked event, actually. Like, yeah, true, you didn't have to play them on your side of the bracket, but you had to beat the mTw team that beat all them. They beat SK and beat FNATIC and all these other big teams that were there, right? To win this event, I imagine as well, the fact it's like a Swedish event is kind of cool, right? Like you're getting your first big win, but in like sort of the circumstances you came up in, right? I mean, it was only a few months earlier. That was just trying to prove yourself at a Dreamhack, right? To actually win Dreamhack Winter must be pretty cool.
Yeah, probably the best playing memory I would probably have. I think the whole 6 months from the summer to the winter was like a fairy tale, you know. We started qualifier playing decent, winning Inferno Line League, coming second against FNATIC in Dubai, and then we had a Dreamhack that was a big tournament. Like everyone can qualify from the BIOC area. All the top teams were there, and as you said, like we didn't play the best teams in the playoffs. I think we played like Millennium and teams like that, but we had to play like mTw in the final, and just to winning that event, like with all these teams stacked against, and also prove people wrong, because people had just seen like the Dubai tournament and they thought that we were just one hit wonder, you know, and to get the win after a second place kind of solidified that we were a good team. And but we kind of shot ourselves in the foot. I think we had like 2 tournaments after that, the Arbalest Cup and then the WESG in China. And then we swapped up MODDII, and then the team was never the same. So it's a lot of what ifs with that team, I think.
I've got a good question about that, though, which is that the reason why, to me, as I was obviously at this event, but the reason why, to me, it makes sense that this is how it went, though, is because, as you say, you set it up perfectly. When you have all these spicy personalities and people with talent, but like they have their own flaws as well, as you say, when you're doing awesome, when you're winning almost every game, yeah, there's not going to be that many problems, are there? At that point, it's funny when people, you know, rage or they have some silly aspect, because who gives a fuck, you winning the game. The obvious problem is going to be any time like trouble hits in the team. And mate, if there was ever an event that could kill a team, it was this event in China. Because if people don't know, one, this is way back in the day, guys. We're talking about in 2009. So this isn't like now when you go to China, you stay in some like fucking 5-star hotel and everyone's like ordering rooms. This is back in the days when like no one's even been to China before. When you go there, I can tell you this wasn't in like Shanghai. These would be in like, let's just say less famous places in China. So you'd also be in like, it's not as glamorous. And also back then, a lot of us weren't super like worldly and traveled a lot. So I know Swedish people, for example, famously, they weren't a big fan of going out and trying to get Chinese for some. They just fucking go to KFC every day or eat in the hotel. So first of all, people aren't actually loving like the luxurious aspect. And then also the event's like a month long. Like it's not like, you know, you remember this, like when we talk about these Dreamhacks and IEMs, they're like 3 days long, guys. This is back when just the group stage would be like 2 weeks for one of these events, right? And so I imagine if you're ever going to have a circumstance where the team can implode, like this is it, because the amount of pressure must have been crazy compared to like a weekend LAN or something, right?
Yeah, I think like the the magic mixture. We had to create this team, and to have this success, we had like the perfect like storm to fuck the team up. I think
Right.
like we won DreamHack, and players started to like say like, oh, I don't want to play with these guys anymore. You know, get a little bit of hubris. You know, like we got kind of like some of the players kind of got complacent, I think. And then we go into like 2 tournaments after that. Arbeit was decent, but the China tournament, like people weren't as hungry after winning DreamHack. And then I think MODDII, rightfully so, was frustrated about it, like that we were not playing good. It was just like how he dealt with it was not the perfect way. But I understand his frustration. Like we weren't playing good, and like being in another country, and then just all this together just started like people turning against each other. And I think if like to have the management like that we have today, like in the pro scene, that could probably save that team back then. Just to have like some guy like that outside the team that can reason with everyone, like to try to deal with it, to create an atmosphere that's good, like could have maybe saved it. But back then it was like we were 5 individuals, we barely like played professional. Like it was still like the feeling of a mixed team, even though we were a serious team. So it was a lot of like personalities ever need to click. So it was very hard to keep it together.
Because I think you nailed it earlier, mate. This is a great example of a what if team. Like, as you say, if you could have been like a management person who could sort of make people be cooler, or actually the joke is even your current role, if there was proper coaches back then, maybe that could have done it too. Because the talent of these players was mega. Like, I mean, you said it earlier. Almost every player of this team went on to other things. Like, look, Zet didn't because it was the end of his career, but like MODDII obviously was like in FNATIC after that, was like winning tournaments. Delpan was in the SK, that was the one best team in the world at one point in time. Fucking Peter went on himself to have a very successful career. He's still in esports now. Like they didn't have to go this way, right? I mean, I agree with you. Maybe it did at the time if you look at who the people are and the stuff. But I'm sure it's something you think about. Like, what if I could have had another year of that team if we could have all stayed together?
Yeah, I mean, I had some like regrets, like always looking back at it, and I can like pinpoint the moment, you know, when we like decided to remove MODDII. Like I can like this is like the worst decision I made in my life, I think.
Right.
It's just like to remove him and kill the team. And like you have this fantasy that like, oh, we're gonna be in f0rest, and f0rest is a good player, you know.
Yeah, of course.
But he's not MODDII, and to just have it, like you fool yourself to believe that you're gonna have such a strong team. Like, oh, we just need to remove the toxic factor, then we're just gonna be as good. And you can just take in like, oh, we don't want to feel like, instead of like trying to resolve the issue, we just went straight to swapping players, and we didn't even try to resolve it.
As you said, you yourself as a player, this is almost the end of your career. You just had this brief time period. There's one team that came together. You built up for all the other years. But then as you, by the way, what you said there is totally accurate as well. Once it got to like 2010 onwards, I can tell fans, even though no one says it now because they've forgotten, at the time, the perspective of pro players was like, each year's the last year of CS. That's what everyone thought. They thought like, right, like basically I'll keep playing as long as there's IEMs and ESWCs, but like everyone thought, in fact, the prize money was even going down a little bit. Everyone thought like it's on its way out, you know, like this is maybe the end of the game. And in fact, actually, if you think of the time period we're talking about, it's not that long in this time period till like StarCraft and League of Legends were the big games, and CS wasn't even number 1 anymore. Like, so what I'm setting up here is like, even though now everyone will think like, what did you should have kept playing? Like, actually, it did kind of seem like an appropriate moment to potentially step away if you don't have a top team, right? I'm sure at the time it didn't seem like too crazy to just say maybe this is the end of my esports career, right?
Yeah, like it was a lot of factors playing into for me, like stepping down in my active career. First of all, like it was not accepted back then to like focus that much time on esport. Like my mother is like, oh, you can play computer games all the time. I had friends that played with me in my earlier teams that stopped. Maybe started going to gym. Was also on me like, oh, you can't like you need to join me at the gym. You need to like stop playing that much, you know. So I had a lot of pressure from the social environment, and then I had like tough work the way I went up like 6 in the morning, practice at 6 in the evening to 12, sleeping like 5 hours, and I was on the grind for like 2-3 years, you know. And when the team imploded, I just felt after when we were in IEM Hanover, the last event I had with Meteor Makers, there was like we don't perform as a team, and I don't perform, and I don't have like energy left to just do this again. So also that CS was like dying out, less money in the scene, was just like, this, am I gonna fight like this last year to get a team for like a game that maybe dies in 1 or 2 years? if I knew that like CSGO would come and like if I knew the future, I would like easily stayed because like I kind of quit it just like when I started getting my prime, just getting the achievements, starting to get comfortable. Then was when I quit. So if I could like hang in for 2 years, then I would probably be like around 25, being in good shape when CSGO came out. But I think at the end of it, I'm pretty happy how it turned out anyways.
Do you think people don't remember you as an in-game leader? Like, should you have gotten more props? Do people just think it was your stars, do you think? It's a classic problem of in-game leader, to be fair.
Yeah, I think in the Swedish scene, I think people knew that I was good in-game leader. And I was also like, I was not the best fragger, but I was also like, I was putting up like good enough numbers. And when the team was playing bad, like you need to focus more effort on the team and then your set's going to be lower. But I remember like having matches where like I was up there. I think when we played against Tess and the guys, I think I had like 14, 16, 3 or something on Inferno and like putting up numbers and calling. So I think like the players I played with, I think knew what I could do. And I think most of the players thought like I was a smart player. I was also like, what I loved the most was clutching, being like alone against people, just outplaying. I was not like maybe the guy that's gonna out aim you, but I was gonna like take peeks that are gonna benefit me. I'm gonna like mind play or mind game you. So I think I feel satisfied with the respect I got in the Swedish scene.
One thing I found... Oh, yeah, go on. Keep going.
I think I just had more to like prove to win them over. Like, oh, this guy is like super good IGL. I think for me, like I can say like, 'cause I know it, like that's how good I was. But if I can't prove it, then it's like it doesn't mean anything. It's just empty words, you know.
One thing I saw was actually in CSGO, it looked like you did something similar to your CS 1.6 journey. You came along for a couple of years in the Swedish scene. You were with players that were like potentially on the rise. If people don't remember, like Team Property and Orbit and some of these, these were some of the G-Finities I was at and Dreamhack Summers and stuff. Like at the time, this is quite early on in CSGO. Were you thinking like, again, if I can like build a team and I can be a pro again? What was the reason for this time period?
This is actually a fun story. And I also remember you casting my first CSGO game at Dreamhack. And I remember what you said, like, is this an old FBI agent coming out from the forest? Okay. And you got to do one last mission.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
But it's actually a funny story because I had like 100 hours past 4 years. And then I started playing CSGO at the end of 2013, like I think December. And I think I went to Dreamhack summer 2014.
Yeah.
And I had like 850 hours in CSGO. I hadn't played for 4 years. And I think Flipside is like, oh, can you IGL and up? And I was not an operator in 1.6, but I could up like decently. I was not a flicker, but I played the position correctly. So I think I didn't know. Yeah, we had Navi the first game, and I didn't know. Like I knew Navi from 1.6. I didn't know who Guardian was. So like the people in my team, like, oh, Guardian's probably best upper. So
you're going head to head with Guardian on the AWP. Yeah. Your first match, okay?
I didn't know who he was, and you know, you need to have some delusional confidence. You know, you'll see tomorrow, boys. I will fuck him up. You don't know. Like I will out AWP him. I promise you. Funny enough, it happened the first game. I think I had like 26 frags. We won the game 16-14. And I had a small oh, I still got it, you know. And I think after that tournament, I tried different variation of lineups. We had a famous lineup with Emilio. He got backbend mid-game against Simple and Hellraisers. And after that, it was Orbit. And it was. I just felt it like it wasn't the same. First off, like just building from scratch again, and also like learning the game in a more serious way, and also how players were playing the game was a little bit different. I think what I noticed coming back that CS, when I played in 1.6, everyone had like really good fundamentals, and it was like really bad. Like if you were lurking or like baiting the team, like that was like a no-go. You were not invited back to play any mixes or anything if you were like a lurker. And we had a special name for it. If you remember the player
KRiMZ. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Of course. So I think what was my thoughts?
Shit. It was about the fundamentals of the game. I'm guessing people were selfish back then.
Yeah. So like I think the semi-elite scene that we called it back then was like everyone was like playing it. Like it was some groups, but everyone was playing each other. Like everyone knew each other. Everyone knew each other's name. So I think the fundamentals just spread across the scene, and we were really good at like playing off each other, like trading each other, and the fundamentals were there. And I think coming back to CSGO, I felt like the fundamentals wasn't like as good as it was in 1.6, and it was also getting to a place where people did more like structured way, and I like a balance between structure. And I think now when like CS has like evolved so much that you have so many grenades and tricks and shit that you need to involve it, but you also need to leave freedom for the players. And I think it was a little bit of clash in the system, and also my skill wasn't as high as it was when I left. So I just said like, okay, I'm just gonna keep playing. And then I had a plan to 1 year before I went into coaching, I had a plan to just go into coaching. And the funny thing is, I didn't mention that to anyone. And then from out of nowhere, people started reaching out about like, oh, you want to coach us?
One player that you had on one of your orbit lineups I do want to ask about is pyth, the player who later on went to play with NIP, obviously. Right, this is the era that basically got him his chance in NIP the next year. So who was this guy? I'm guessing he was a prospect himself, right? Who was he when you were working with him?
Yeah, Jacob, he was like super friendly guy. A little bit awkward, but in a funny, friendly, charming way, you know. But his skill was like really good. And he was also like, I felt like he, at least when he played like before NIP, it felt like he played without pressure. He was having fun, just playing. And I got the feeling, just looking from the outside, that when I saw him playing with NIP, like the pressure maybe got too much, and he didn't like evolve to the potential that he had. I think he still like he played good in NIP, but I think he had the potential to do even more. But I think it didn't translate for him in NIP. Unfortunately, and I think like his career after that kind of ended pretty fast. And from what I know, he had like a small brief career in Valorant as well. Like he played like with a G2, I believe. Like they had a good run in the start of Valorant.
One thing I saw was weird. It's actually interesting you tell that story that you hadn't even announced to the world that you were going to become a coach. Because one of the early lineups you coached is like, who the fuck made this roster? Was that one where you worked with Escape? So it was with Barbar, the old AWP, who actually was at the very end of your like MYM time. But then the other players, it's like, who made this roster? Because it's like Esatag, the Danish player, Dead Fox from fucking Hungary. It's like, what is this lineup here? Like, what a weird lineup.
Yeah. Like I didn't know. Like it was just Barbar that came to me like, oh, do you want to coach us? So I ended up coaching them, and then they like, I think they removed a player, and then they brought in to me to play as an IGL, and I think then we had like Stan and Cadian was standing in for us for assembly. I think it was just like a mess. That team was a mess. The organization they had like they were good people, but the team was a mess, and I think the project died pretty fast.
If people don't know, like, obviously one of the first teams you got to be like a proper coach on was FNATIC, which is a pretty big deal because back then they'd had like the Vogo guy, but as far as I know, he was like half analyst, half coach, because this is when the role's developing. And before that, obviously people like Delwalk just used to be pro players of theirs. So that's more, if people don't know, that's actually more like essentially Pronax's friend gives his thoughts on the game. Like, I don't think they had the proper role. When you joined FNATIC, right, this is a big esports org, it's a very professional, people like Card, etc. When you joined, did you actually get the sense that I'm going to get to be like a proper coach? Like, I'm not just a guy just watching demos, I actually can coach these guys?
I think like back then, this is 2016, so the coaching role was not like super defined yet. And for me, I had been a coach for like a few months before this. So my like leading experience was leading from an IGL standpoint. And I think in the start of my coaching career, I kind of had that leading style, like leading from an IGL perspective, but not playing. So I think the main thing I think that I was brought into FNATIC was to be an IGL coach, because that was the thing back then, you know.
Oh, because you could still talk on the mic all the time.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, true.
But during our negotiations, Val came out and Ban right. Like, coach cannot talk.
Right.
And I was like, okay, do you still want me? But
luckily you got the guy. Okay, you got the job.
So I got it, and I think we had a bit of a weird lineup to start with. I think we had
Yes.
like Berndtsson, Olof.
This was
Dennis.
when some of the players had gone to Godsend. If people don't
Yeah.
remember, like some of the more famous ones, like KRiMZ and JW, obviously, yeah. But you still had like olofmeister and some bang twist.
Yeah.
Twist's a pretty sick player, right?
Yeah. We had Lekko as well. So like it was a good like team with high skill, and I think we did pretty decent. Like I think we like kind of choked out. I think it was ESL New York, ESL1 New York against Liquid double. We faced them 2 times on that too. And PM come to me after your guys need to work on their individual skill.
Of course, there you go.
But yeah, where was he? You can keep going.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, look,
it's been off too long.
obviously, like later on, we can talk about when the Godsend swap came back, and then you got like the original classic players. But before this, there was one result that I think that people always forget, which is at the first major Astralis won, ELEAGUE Atlanta. This FNATIC team was in the semis. This was actually when you had Disco Doppler as well, if people remember. He'd come in from the Epsilon team. And everyone forgets, because if they see on paper like FNATIC in the semi of mids, they're going to think it was the classic lineup with Prodax. But it isn't. This is actually still the weird one before you like did the swap back, right? This run was a pretty big run. If people forget, that semi-final actually had some really close matches. Like actually, people like Device had to play like some fucking insane CS in that match, I remember. Like, there's a real world for real, Jumpy, where like, this team could have sort of fluked that major and maybe won it even, right? Like, this team was in good form at this event, right?
Yeah, I think we also we just got it back KRiMZ, so we swapped Lekko for KRiMZ. We got KRiMZ back, so we had like 3 of the players. We also got the major spot, I believe, just because KRiMZ got back. And then we had Twist. He was like really solid upper, and we had Disco Doppler. He was really skilled. His problem was probably confidence, and he was a really quiet person. Like, his communication was probably the worst I've seen at the pro level, but his skill was really good. So, but this event, I think we even struggled in the start of the group, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if we were down 1-2 or how it was. I felt like we struggled, but maybe I'm remembering wrong.
No, you lost the first game to G2 on cash, but after that you won them all.
Oh, okay. Then we were really good form, I guess. But it felt pretty good. Like, I think Dennis did a good job calling. Like, and I think back then, like, even though Dennis was IGLing a bit, he wasn't like a natural IGL.
He didn't really want to do it, as far as I know. I think he just had to do it sometime, right?
He had a specific style, fast, explosive, and back then it worked like really good. So I think, that run was good. And also, like, losing to the major winners is, if you're going to lose to anyone, it's probably the guys who's going to win the tournament.
Sure. By the way, obviously, this isn't like the prime olofmeister. In fact, he'd already had that injury at this point in time, and he shifted his game a little bit. But what was it like to work with olofmeister? Because one thing I don't think people know about this guy, Jumpy, is, like, on the one hand, some of the stuff you see on camera is true. He can be a really chill guy. But I can tell you, he's also a guy where when they were on their top and they would lose, he's a guy where if you saw him backstage, mate, he might punch a monitor or get fucking mad. So yeah, he kind of had like a bit of fire behind it. Maybe just didn't see that on camera. But it seemed like a very interesting individual. Who was this guy to coach?
Yeah, I think olofmeister is probably one of the most professional guys I've coached. I think, like, he was never like getting into the drama or fights. He was just like calm and collected, and he just went in like he's kind of like was just this is my job. Of course, he had passion, and as you said, like, he had a passion. So if we lose, he could show like it sucks to lose, right? And he doesn't want to lose. But he went in there. He always like, okay, I'm gonna do my best. This is my job. Like, full focus every time.
Since, as you said, in this particular lineup, this is when KRiMZ had come back before they remade the classic lineup again and ran it back. What I want to ask is this: who is this guy like to work with? Because I've always said from the outside, he looks like every coach's dream player, like just does whatever role you want. Seems like, again, by the way, if you want to talk about people, I know people think of like flusha and those legendary names. Whenever I think of FNATIC, the reason I always think of KRiMZ is, dude, he looked like pressure never affected him. He just looked like he was just a random game. In fact, you could even see on his face, he had an amazing poker face as well. What's this guy like to work with?
Freddie is probably one of my favorite players ever. I'm still good friends with him today, and he's like a player that he doesn't need a lot of space. Like, he's gonna make the most of like just holding a weird position where he shouldn't get killed, and he's just like mowing people down. And I think was made like KRiMZ so important to FNATIC, even like before when I wasn't there, that they had so many playmakers, and KRiMZ was more like a guy that he's not like a super passive player, but he's more like letting people play around, and he's reacting to the players in front of him and doing a super good job on it. So like, and you need players like that. You can't have like 5 playmakers that just gonna go out and make plays, and sometimes you must run over people and then you lose. But you just have that safety factor that, okay, you have some playmakers, and if they fail making a play or opening up the map, then like you have KRiMZ back there that can clean up, you know. So super good player, like super like good mechanics. And I think it was a fun fact that at the E-League, I think they had like this reaction test, and I think he had like the second best reactions after Skadoodle.
Fair play.
And it was like compared to like NHL hockey keepers, I think.
Right. Okay.
So like super good reactions and super calm. I think, as you said, like the player you see when on stage when KRiMZ is playing is the furthest from the player, like from the person that is like when we hang out outside of the server. He's the biggest joker, like making the team laugh, and super fun to be around. So yeah, like it was really fun to work with him.
Right, I actually did a video on the topic of this lineup that got remade when the players came back from Godsend, and they made that like, because my point that I made was this, Jumpy. You know, like 2 years ago, where Imperial made that Brazilian lineup, they're like, it's the last dance. But then, like, if you ever looked, like that actual lineup had never played together. It was like people who in different times had played. And basically, the story goes, they did try to make the real last dance with like Gold Zero and stuff, but you know, some players said no, so they just made it anyway with like whoever was available, basically. But my joke in my video was, we already did the last dance. Like literally the FNATIC team that won those 6 tournaments when they had Dennis instead of Prodax, obviously, remade itself this year and tried to have a whole year and run it all back and see if they could recreate the magic. And the reason I bring this up as an example is because, one, like the idea of a last dance is cool in like a movie, but in real life it's usually not as good, is it? And to me, this team's a great example of that, because on paper these are amazing players. In fact, some of them even have careers years, like Olof and FaZe. Obviously, some of them stayed in FNATIC years after this and had success. So it's not like the players sucked. But what I want to ask you is this: the reason why I think the idea of a last dance is so romantic and everyone loves it is because you're thinking of the best times, right? When you run it back again, I imagine there's a lot of challenges having a team that's already worked together, already had time to. In fact, in your case, they were there before you were there. What were some of the challenges of working with like a roster that I'm sure probably thought they're just going to win, right? They probably thought, we get this team back together, we're just going to win.
Yeah, this was also a fun fact because the players talk to themselves, like, and I yesterday got a message from Dennis like, oh, we're bringing the old team back together, but we still want you as a coach. I was like, great.
I love the way that's phrased. Okay.
So, and I built up like a good rapport with the team I started planning with, and then like going into this team was a little bit different. Like, first of all, like we didn't like really have an IGL. I think flusha is a guy that he should never have touched the in-game leading role.
He actually says the same thing. I think he said he shouldn't have done it. Yeah.
And I think after that I think we just had like half a year with the going back to this team. And I think after that, like, okay, we need an IGL, because flusha is a guy that is like, is reading the game and he's a great secondary caller. But being an IGL is also like, okay, if we don't get openings, you need to decide like where to open up and where we should like manage the team to your own, like to the cost of your own, you know. And that flusha is not that guy. Like he should focus on like reading the game, making the plays. That's his strong suit. Not controlling the team and making the team like set up the team in a good way. And I think it was not making our team better, and it also like I think it hurt flusha's career in the long run to just waste. I think he played like IGL in some teams after this as well, if I'm not wrong. And I think if he would continue playing the lurk, I think his career had been, even though it was really good, I think it would have been even better.
By the way, along these lines, when I did an interview with him, like I think it was like last year or something, it wasn't that long ago, and I asked him about this exact topic, he kind of agrees with what you're saying. So I would frame it this way, Jumpy. The problem is, the reason why I can see why he, even though he also, as far as I know, never really wanted to be in-game leader, he just did it when like the team didn't have one or someone has to do the role. The big problem, I know what you mean by saying that is, right, individually, we all know he's a fucking genius player, isn't he? Like he probably had one of the best reading skills in the whole game. That's why everyone thought he cheated, because it's like he did know that you were behind the wall and where you were going to be and what what to do in the 1v. But the problem is, though, he admitted himself, Jumpy, that to him, that seemed obvious to be able to read the game that way. So I actually get the sense for an in-game leader, that's also not very good, right? Because you're going to think your teammates are seeing things or they're seeing openings, but they're not. Like, you're just seeing that because you're flusher. Like, you have to understand you're on another level, right? Sometimes some teammates just look at the crosshair, mate. They're not thinking about things sometimes, right?
Yeah, I think you put it kind of perfect. Like, I think flusha, he assumed people understood the game as him, and he took it for granted, and sometimes even frustrated because, like, what are you doing? Like, this is so obvious, you know. And I think also, like, it's a big misconception that I think back then, I think around 2017, 2018, a lot of like star players had the idea like, oh, I will just go IGL, and I think people like, they don't understand, like, okay, you making a great call every third round when you have the read is super easy. But how make a call when you don't have the read? Yes. Direct your team when you don't have a read what you're doing. And you need to do this every round. And when it goes, like, when you don't find openings, when we're overextending, you lose entries everywhere, how do you control the team? How do you get the team together? And all these factors. But people, I think, back then at least, I think people got smarter now, that they just assume just because you can do a mid-round call or read the game good, that's just IGLing, when it's so much more to it.
Right, one thing I want to ask you was, when the team like that, as you said, this was back in the day when players had all the power. Like, they basically made the roster moves, they made the lineups, they kicked people, they did whatever they wanted. That's what CS used to be like back then, right? This is actually coming towards the end of that era, though. So what I want to ask is this, is how did that lineup break apart? Like, was it the case that if you'd had more success, like maybe olofmeister would have stayed? Obviously, he went to FaZe Clan, people don't remember. Like, what did the team inside get what I said earlier, that, like, you know, the idea of the last dance was good, but it didn't deliver like everyone hoped, right? I'm guessing people understood it didn't reach expectation. Did it naturally break apart as a team? Was there any bad blood? What happened?
I think it was never a bad blood. I think, like, it faded out. It was like some conflicts during this 6 months between some players. So it's not all perfect, and we're not like playing good. But I think, like, everyone just realized, like, before Krakow Major, I think, like, everyone felt like this is our last tournament. Like, after that, we just split up the team. Everyone, like, tried to find new homes and just try to continue our careers in a different direction. So I think it was felt pretty mutual, like, across the board. It was my feeling, at least.
In this esports world, it can seem like everyone's against you, but I've always got the Illuminati, my Patreon community, riding with me. And it is thanks to the support of the following people, this video and all of them on my channel are made possible. Matt, Pugnacho Rakula, Ahmed Haju, Frisky, Tosh, Jensen Go, Animosity, Toucan, Tobias Bernasconi. If you've ever watched my videos, you know now I'm going to give a massive shout out to Jerky's Minion, the main man. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? You want teasers? Find out who the upcoming interview guests are. Maybe you want to ask me a question. I tend to answer them at length in my video AMA. Do you want to take part in one of those dinner discussions where we talk about what you're interested in esports? Well, if any of these perks or more appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Illuminati today, where in the description box below is a Patreon link.